Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stan Orchowski, and I am JRSA's Research Director, and I'd like to welcome you to this afternoon's webinar on Maintaining a Digital Presence, the Illinois Statistical Analysis Center Experience, featuring Mark Powers from the aforementioned Illinois Statistical Analysis Center. Before we get started, I want to cover a few logistical items. We'll be recording today's session for future playback. The link to the recording will be posted on JRSA's website and emailed to attendees and those on the waiting list. Today's webinar is being audiocast via both the speakers on your computer and teleconference. If you have speakers on your computer or headphones and are not a presenter, we recommend listening to the webinar using your computer speakers or headphones. To access the conference, the audio conference, select audio from the top menu bar and then select audio conference. Once the audio conference window appears, you can view the teleconference call-in information or join the audio conference via your computer. If you have questions for the presenter or would like to communicate with JRSA staff, we encourage you to submit your questions using the chat feature on the right side of your screen. Please select host from the drop-down menu next to the text box. All of the telephones have been muted. The schedule the session is scheduled for an hour and a half. We'll finish promptly at 3:30 Eastern. If you have technical difficulties or you get disconnected during the session, you can reconnect using the same link that you used to join initially. You can also call WebEx tech support at 1-866-229-3239. In the last 5 minutes of today's webinar, we're going to ask you to complete a short survey. If I remember, the information you provide will help us to plan and improve future webinars and meet our reporting requirements. As I mentioned, today's webinar is on maintaining a digital presence. The genesis of this webinar is really partly that I was looking at the Illinois website back, I believe it was last fall, and was just really impressed with what they've done in terms of the tools that are available online. And so I reached out to those folks, and Mark has graciously agreed to present that information to you today. Mark has been a research analyst at the Illinois Criminal Justice Authority since 2006. His interests include corrections, recidivism, applied statistics, and record linkage. He received a master's degree in criminology from the University of South Florida and learned how to develop web tools on the job with the aid of SJS grants. How about that, huh? His current projects include the analysis of crime and recidivism for various programs in Illinois and improving the data accessibility of Illinois criminal justice data. So with that, I am going to turn this over to Mark. And Mark, thank you so much for agreeing to do this afternoon.
Okay, looks like I'm the presenter now. As Stan mentioned, my name is Mark Powers. I've been a research analyst here for about 10 years. And so Illinois Criminal Justice Information Authority houses the Illinois Statistical Analysis Center. I think probably most people that would be listening to this webinar are also in a statistical analysis center. But just as a summary of what we do at the SAC, we collect, house, and disseminate data over geography and time, geography being mostly county level, and time being mostly years. We publish reports on data trends over time. We conduct evaluations, both impact and process, and we publish those results of those evaluations. And we provide technical assistance to counties, local units of government, and various other bodies. I would say, though, at least since I've been here for the past 10 years, the actual services that we provide really haven't changed that much over time. But the technology has changed quite a bit and has allowed us to increase efficiency of what we actually deliver. So for this presentation, I'm going to cover a couple different things. I'm going to show you what our SAC website looked like over time, as we went through basically two very large redesigns. One back in 2010, one actually took place over several years, around 2010 to 2012. Another one that was fairly recent in 2015. I'm going to cover some user-based considerations and possibly some data considerations if we have time. And then I'll show you some examples of data tools and software that we use, and I'll show you kind of, if you don't use data tools at your own SAC, maybe you'll get some ideas that you can possibly adopt. And at the end, I'll give you some recommendations just from our experience of developing this website over the past 6 years or so. So we can go back in time to 2010 to 2012 to see what we were involved with in terms of the actual website. And what I really want to look at is how it actually started before we began the redesign. So 2010, Illinois made a top 12 websites list. That normally would be a good news item. Unfortunately, though, it ended up being the 12 worst government websites. So obviously, we had to make a change to our website. And just looking at this, like it's one of those list articles, and I don't know if I would take it all that seriously. But the critique does make some good points. And of course, to add some insult to injury, you had 16 people like this on Facebook. So one of the reasons why the actual website was not very good is that we were all stuck in a template that at the time when Blagojevich was governor, he basically mandated that all state agencies use the same template. So as a result, every Illinois government website basically looked the same. And the actual template was, by 2010, at least 6 years out of date. And I could actually show you by using something called the Internet Archive. I'm going to go ahead and share my desktop and go to the Internet browser. So this is the actual website as it looked in 2004. You can go to webarchive.org and actually look at our website all the way back to the 90s. And if you look at what it looked like on that PowerPoint slide compared to this, it's virtually identical. And keep in mind, that PowerPoint slide, that article was written in 2010, and this is the 2004 capture. If you look to see what the SAC actually, or how the SAC is represented on this page, it's kind of not really obvious. And if anything, the SAC is kind of scattered all over the place. We're kind of in the publications, we're kind of in the data. Our data is often presented in county profiles. There's nowhere that says really statistical analysis center or research unit or anything like that. So that was 2004. Let's go forward to 2006, 2 years later. As you can see, not much has changed. I don't know if I would expect too much of a change in 2 years. But the only thing that really changed here was it's the same issue. We have the data here. I can show you actually what some of the products were backed into. Also, our county profiles are here. We got lumped in with the inflatable dog balloon as well. Here's some of the actual data that we were presenting back then. So 2006, we were pretty much presenting things like static PDFs of maps and static charts. So these weren't actually live, these were not connected to actual live data. Once you put them up there, you really can't change it unless you re-upload and redo the PDF and the map. The county profiles, we used to do these in the early 2000s, and I think prior, every few years. And I'll just show you one because you can actually see what it still looks like. We'll just take Adams County. This is the 2006 website capture. The actual profile was published in 2004, which means the data by then was probably 2002. So it's very difficult for the SAC to actually keep these things updated in a good amount of time. And eventually what we want to do is create something more like a real-time live profile, which we have recently sort of done. I'll show you that toward the end. Let's see. Let's go to 2010, where the actual article about the worst websites is written. Again, the actual website doesn't look that much different. You can start to see some modernization, though, where we have more interactive menus and so on. But again, there isn't really anything that says, here's the research units or the SAC's website. It's basically just that we're kind of all over the place. And that was one of the things that we really wanted to change when we decided to redo the website after basically the new governor, Pat Quinn, said you no longer have to use this old template. Come up with the best idea that you can on your own. So you go back to the PowerPoint. Right around then, though, there were some major advancements, particularly in web technology, and then also funding opportunities. One of the big advancements that actually was around for quite a while, but it was primarily used for other purposes, was Adobe Flash. And in the past, you would usually see Flash video games and Flash movies on websites. But around then, though, people started to realize we could actually use this Flash technology to create these kind of interactive data tools. And it would actually be very difficult back then to accomplish this using standard HTML for various reasons that I'll kind of get into a little bit below. Another big technology advancement was something called jQuery, which is basically just a simplified JavaScript code library that lets people who have less coding experience actually use JavaScript very proficiently, and they can use this JavaScript across several different browsers without having to write different versions of the code. So for example, for those of you who've used the internet for quite a while, maybe back in the late 90s, you might remember websites saying, this site is best viewed using Netscape Navigator version 2.5 and so on. That's because there was so much different code that had to be written that was customly assigned to each browser. jQuery kind of wiped that all out. And basically jQuery now, it started out being adopted by maybe 20% of all websites, and now it's close to probably 75 to 80%. The other big advancement, and this is not really a technology one, but more so a funding opportunity, was the SJS grants. And what these really did was they gave us the opportunity to fund dedicated staff as well as software purchases. And I kind of wanted to emphasize this dedicated staff thing, where we could have actually probably tried to redesign our SAC website without SJS grants, but I think other SACs will have the same experience with if you try to do some sort of project and then all of a sudden a new project comes up that all of a sudden takes priority over the website improvement, that website improvement is going to get pushed back a year, maybe another year after that, and the year after that, and so on. The SJS grant works really well in that you have a deliverable that's due at the end of a grant period. Usually it's a year. So if you don't have that deliverable, you could be in trouble for getting additional SJS funding in later years. So it really is the kind of carrot and stick scenario there. So to start things, in 2010, we did several steps. And I'll just go through briefly what these steps were. The first thing we did was we developed a concept paper. And I'll talk about what went in that concept paper directly after this slide. After we wrote that concept paper, we used it to basically write our SJS grants application, which we did receive in the end. We took some time to inventory all of our data, which at the time was stored entirely in Excel spreadsheets. And what we did is we converted that data into a normalized access database, which we're now actually going to be moving into SQL Server. We also took some time to actually basically just use internet searching to find different software that would allow us to do these interactive web tools that you could use for mapping, time series analysis, county comparisons, and so on. Back then, there weren't a lot of options. This is around 2010. We did find one that was pretty good looking. It's called Instant Atlas, which was actually at the time a Scottish company. As we were actually looking at these tools, our webmaster informed us though that whatever we did, we had to have something called an accessible alternative, which I'll get into that in one of the later slides. But it's basically that if you have some sort of web tool, you have to have an alternative for those people that cannot access that web tool. Usually they cannot access it due to things like visual impairments, issues where they have difficulty using a mouse, and so on. So finally, when we had all that put together, we produced these Instant Atlas templates using the software that we purchased. We set up some update procedures so we don't have to, so that in later years the updates went pretty smoothly. We put all of our Excel files online, and then we just made all of our publications a little bit easier to find. So it's kind of a lot, but I'll show you over time what that looked like. But first, I think I should actually talk a little bit about what that concept paper should look like. And this doesn't have to be a 20, 30-page document. You could probably get it done in about 4 or 5 pages. And you basically want to cover at least these 5 things. You might want to cover a couple other additional things depending on what the actual project is, but these should always usually be covered. And those items are the products and goals, the audience that you're actually aiming, whatever you're trying to develop for, the feasibility of the project, any benefits that you expect to gain, and then the estimated cost. And this is just going to be a rough ballpark thing because you might not even know how much or which software you're going to purchase and so on, and then how you expect to actually pay for this. So, for example, for our products and goals in 2010 versus the 2015, back in 2010, we wanted to have data downloads. In this case, I'm referring specifically to Excel files. We didn't really have that before online. What happened was that in order to get data from us, they would have to actually email us, write us, or call us, and we would either email them back an Excel file. We oftentimes actually put them on CD-ROM and send them through mail and so on. It was a very time-consuming process. Another goal that we wanted, as I mentioned before, was the interactive mapping and time series, as well as we had to figure out how to handle that accessible alternative that was required under state guidelines. In terms of the feasibility, you really want to think about probably 3 main things. One is if you have the right staff, and if you have the right staff, or if you don't have the right staff, do your current staff need training? At least for the 2010 redesign that we went through, I think that my managers considered that I was the right staff, but I still needed training. So we worked that into the SJS grant. You have to think about what threats there might be to impeding your progress, and particularly if these are going to be those projects that come out of left field where maybe it's like a governor's commission where all of a sudden you need to run dozens and dozens of analyses that's going to normally take up the time that you would spend on this progress. And then lastly, think about, is the updating of the actual tools, data, and so on feasible over the long run? Benefits and costs, you just want to think about what the actual SAC as well as the users of the SAC's website would gain from this. And you can think about those benefits relative to what you currently offer, as well as kind of like an opportunity cost of what you expect to gain as benefits compared to what you would also expect to gain as benefits from using an alternative product. I think though, at least in our experience, I think we oftentimes will overestimate and underestimate some of these benefits. It's hindsight's 20/20 in this factor, but if, for example, just putting the Excel files online probably saves at least one working day for a staff member every week. So it's almost like having an additional staff member for 52 days extra a year. In terms of the costs, you have to figure out what you want to purchase, how much it's going to cost you, and then also, do you need the maintenance and support that vendor might provide? If you're going to actually build your own tool in terms of coding, you have to probably think about the staffing in terms of how much time it's going to take them to develop and update any code that you write. So I'm going to actually show you now what the website looked like after the redesign. So the website basically went from this appearance to this appearance. And I think it's a much more modern looking design. And even today, I think it still looks quite good. The graphic there, it's not really an important graphic. It's just basically a stock photograph, but it does give some sort of visual flair to the website. I think our stuff is more, it was definitely easier to figure out where things were. The news was all one section. Funding for our grantees, information was there. Our publications were on the right here. Probably though most important for the SAC is now we had our own research menu as well as our own kind of portion of the website. We were no longer spread across all sorts of different menus and tabs and so on. So just going, I actually have this different tab, but what we could do is with our menu, you can go to the actual Statistical Analysis Center homepage. You can go directly to the data sets into our various publications. This is what the research or the Statistical Analysis Center Illinois website looked like back then. The only thing that's missing was there used to be a picture here, but I can't get it to show up using the Internet Archive. And it basically, I think this really simplified showing where our products, what our products were and where they are. Our data sets were available right here on the link to the left. Our various tools that we developed with the SGS grant were all just below that. And you'll notice too, like back then I had to specify whether or not Adobe Flash was required. In this case, for these two, it was, for the two instant analysis tools. And the detailed data tables is actually what I am calling it's the accessible alternative to the Adobe Flash tools. And so basically the layout is, projects are here, publications. Overall, it's just a much cleaner design. And we were pretty happy with this. I think we would have still been happy with it today if it wasn't for one kind of big change in web technology. I'll show the instant analysis tools, by the way, toward the end. Okay, so if the website actually still looked good, then why did we change it? Why did we have another redesign in 2015? And it's probably pretty obvious for those of you who are, if you're in a meeting right now with other people or just looking around the room, it's probably right on the desk in front of you. Mobile. Basically, people started accessing our website using mobile devices a lot more. That changed the way that we had to think about how our website's going to look. Let me just show you actually just what I kind of mean by that. One of the nice features of Adobe, or not Adobe, of Google Chrome is that it allows you to look and see what your website would look like under different devices. So for example, this is what it looked like under an iPhone 5. The problem is everything is really smushed together on the screen, right? And then to click the links with a finger, you've got to be pretty accurate. You have to be pretty much right on it for it to work. So we decided that we would probably have to redesign the website so it's responsive to various other devices, mobile and desktop being the primary ones, and then tablets. If you can get it between those two, it's going to work. As I mentioned, there was a big change in smartphones in that they used to be somewhat of like a luxury item, and now pretty much everybody has one, which means more and more people are going to be accessing your data and your website through mobile over time. The other big thing is that mobile required applications to be much more what's kind of considered to be lightweight, which means that they run on using less resources. There was a very public war between Apple and Adobe over Adobe Flash. You can probably guess who won that one now. But basically, at that point in time, I don't think Apple even allowed Flash to be used on their devices. So HTML5 eventually replaced Flash in applications, including our tools. And luckily, we bought our Internet Atlas application with the optional support and maintenance. So when they upgraded those tools, we were able to get the HTML5 replacements as part of that maintenance. The other thing that happened was that there were, the web developers started putting various examples and code libraries online, which made developing just easier overall for everybody, whether or not you were a very skilled website, if you were a website developer, or if you were kind of a novice like I was. I think, though, this isn't really a technology change, but I don't think we, at the time, really fully engaged our audience with our content. I think actually, I'll show you what I mean by that, but if you were to divide our audience into two different groups, I think we were only engaging one of them. So I'm going to give you a hypothetical scenario that maybe your SAC fits. I think our SAC probably fits this. And I don't really have any proof of these exact numbers, but I have a feeling that this is pretty correct. I have a feeling that about 20% of our users consume about 80% of the content on our website, and 80% of our users consume only 20%. So these would be like the power users in the 20% that use a lot of our data, they read our publications, they apply for grants and so on. And the 80% probably only access our site once a year, if that, and they're just looking for one small piece of information. And what that is, that 80-20 rule, you probably heard of that before. It's called the Pareto principle. I think like there's a common example in crime where it's 80% of the crimes are committed by 20% of the offenders. Those numbers are not exact, but it's that general principle where minority commits the majority of some sort of event. So I have a feeling that 80% of our users may not know the terminology. Criminal justice terminology is actually quite difficult to a layperson. Things are very similar except for like one crucial detail. For example, prison and jail. Illinois jail is for misdemeanors, serving under a year. Prison is for felonies, serving over a year. They're still basically all just housed in a building, so there's not a huge difference there. Parole versus probation, I guarantee almost very few lay people actually know the difference there. I think we've had to explain what the difference is between an arrest and defense several different times over the years to many people. I think even these users, they might even actually know what they're really looking for. They just know that they need some sort of criminal justice data to back up a grant application or something like that. And maybe they need just a single number, or maybe they need many numbers for their particular county. On the opposite end, though, you have the power users who know all the terminology. You don't have to tell them about it. They know pretty much what they're looking for, and they want a lot of detailed historical data. And they're actually more likely to use the web tools that we have, or to just download the data and analyze it on their own. So on the second redesign, I thought we were in really good shape for our power users that are in this blue, the blue group, the ones who consume the most content. But I thought we were lacking in content for the basic users who would not be considered the power users, the occasional visitors, and so on. So that's what we decided to concentrate on for the 2015 redesign. And we were kind of lucky there because when we switched to the mobile website, most of what we had before still worked, and it worked without interruption. The Internet Atlas stuff was already in HTML5 by the time we switched, so that we didn't have to worry about. The reports, and we kind of had to do some different keyword tagging and so on, and we put them on a different entry page. But for the most part, our SAC content was actually in pretty good shape for the transition. But there were two things that we thought we were missing. One was a shorter way to show what our articles, not our articles, what our reports said. And we decided to put these into shorter articles. And I'll show you some examples of those in a little bit. But basically, it's a way for people to look at what we've done in the SAC without having to read a 100-page PDF. The other thing is, for a new data tool, we decided to make a county profile tool that puts the data in a really simple format without a lot of options that I think pretty much anybody who, whether or not they have criminal justice experience or much knowledge of the criminal justice system, will probably be able to actually figure out what they need. So this is basically just one way to provide different products for different users. For our 80%, we now offer these, what we offered before, which is a series called Get the Facts and the Walkthroughs of the Criminal Justice System. And now we have these short articles. and as well as the data profiles. Like I said before, for the 20% of the users that we consider kind of be the power users, we pretty much didn't change too much because we thought we were already giving them quite a bit of content. So let me show you what the new website looked like after the reset. This is the homepage to the Illinois Criminal Justice Information Authority. You'll notice it's much more graphical now, and obviously it's going to, the reason why it's partly is because it will work well on mobile. Let me actually show you what this looks like on mobile. So now that horizontal layer of pictures turns into a vertical one, so it allows for scrolling. You can easily click on the boxes, so it's not an issue where your fingers are too large for the link to work, and so on. And everything's more of a vertical layout when it's in mobile. The site is responsive to which device you use. So on desktop, it looks differently. Research Analysis Unit, or the SAC, still had their own kind of page. It just looks a little bit different, so it works well on mobile devices. Actually, we'll go ahead and just go to that. So now we have basically kind of 5 or 6 groupings. An overview of what the Research Analysis Center looks like, who's in it, who are the managers, and what their functions are. Our publications, which are now broken down into full reports as well as articles. A listing of articles, and this kind of looks like what you'd expect out of a news blog. We had information now on the actual staff members in the SAC. We didn't actually have that before, but we had it actually in the site from the early 2000s, I believe. And then we have all of our tools in one spot. And then last but not least, data in terms of the Excel downloads are still available. I didn't have to really change much of anything for this to work on the mobile devices either. So let me show you an example of an article, because I'll show you actually how we kind of go about making these. Let me go to, let's see, we'll do this one. Male survivors of river violence and trauma. I think I clicked on the wrong one, but so this loads the actual full report. But if you don't want to read the full report, we have an alternative that's just a shorter article. And the article basically has a small amount of text, it's printed out. It's probably 5 to 10 pages, probably at most, and then a graphic. And the interesting part about this is that we have the SAC members who are not web developers, they're not professional web developers. They're actually creating this and these charts in HTML and JavaScript on their own. We actually send the HTML and JavaScript to our webmaster. So I think it's kind of important in that we no longer need to rely on the webmaster to do all of the work. You can actually do some of the actual development ourselves. And I'm going to actually show you how we do that. We use a couple different tools. For the most part, they're free. So I think pretty much every SAC can use these. With the web articles, we use something called Markdown and high charts. Markdown isn't really so much as like a tool. It's more of a technology or a concept. What it does is it allows you to type as if you're using a word processor, and it will automatically create the HTML. So you don't have to actually know HTML to use it. There's a free online editor that we use called stackedit.io. The charts that we use are from something called high charts. It's a JavaScript library that allows you to create these interactive charts, and it's fairly easy to create. And what I do typically is, I'll show you an example of this, is I don't actually code any of these from scratch. I just find an example that someone else got to work, and I modify that example until it fits the way we want it to look. High charts is free if you're non-commercial. It's kind of a tricky license. Government sites have to pay a license, which I think is $150. It used to be totally free for everybody, but they just went commercial in the past couple of months. To test these things, you don't actually have to use this, but we use it. It's something called JS Fiddle or JavaScript Fiddle, which is free again, and it acts as kind of like a temporary container or a sandbox for you to test both of these above and see what your actual article is going to look like. When we use these, we don't actually care too about what the styling is in terms of the font size, the font color, the spacing, and so on, because when we give this to our webmaster, it's going to automatically pick up the rest of our website's usual standard design features. So let me show you actually how we go about creating one of these web articles using stack.edit.io with Markdown and high charts. All right, so this is the stack.edit.io editor. And what you do is you basically type in it just like a word processor, but usually what you can kind of do, you tag various elements. So for example, to create this as a heading versus just normal text, you put a hashtag in front of it. If you wanted to do another heading, you put 2. If you want to make a link to something in some text, you surround it in square brackets, and you put the link in parentheses. So this shows up as a web link. You can decide to make text bold. You can do bullet points, various subheadings. You can, for example, link to images. I'll actually do an image link real quick. I'm going to just pick some random image. It won't make any sense in regards to the article, but it's not a real article anyway. So I'm going to click up here, image, put the URL, click OK. There's the image. Yeah, this is kind of a stupid example. It's just a kind of a dummy article, but I think it's just showing you how this works. It's really sufficient. So once you have your article in here and your headings, your links, and so on, what you could do is go to the menu and say export to disk and export as HTML. And when you click this, it will download as a file. And the file is basically, you want to just open it in a text editor and copy it. Right-click, copy. And then for this particular article, let's say I wanted to use a line chart. So I want to figure out how to actually create a line chart in the high charts. But I'm not going to code it from the ground up. I'm just going to find an example. So let's go ahead and do that, actually. Let's Google high charts, line chart example. This is basically a basic line. High charts provides a lot of documentation on how to create these things. So this is a basic line chart. They allow you to look at all the options. And what I'm just going to do is I'm going to click this edit in JS fill. In this top box is the HTML, and here's the JavaScript. I'm going to just go ahead and paste what I had in that other document that I exported. Click Run. You can see there's what I was using as an article. And now I have this chart. The chart, of course, doesn't make any sense because it's just an example from the high charts documentation. But if you look at the actual chart language, I wouldn't expect anybody who's not a web developer to actually write one of these from scratch, but you could easily edit it. So for example, it says monthly average temperature here. I could see that's the title. Maybe I would say this is felony sentences. We'll just actually use felony sentences. Subtitle, source, it's not worldcrime.com. In our case, is the Administrative Office of Illinois Courts, which I'm just going to abbreviate as AOIC. As you edit it, you can go ahead and click Run to see what it looks like. You can see the title changed and the subtitle changed. Categories, I look here, I see a bunch of different months. I look on the chart, I see the months there. So what I can just do is change these, for example, to years. Say, for example, 2000, 2001, so on. What I'm going to do is just to speed up this example, is I'm going to take it directly from an Excel file. So I know that just looking at the example that it had to be separated by commas. So what I'm just going to do is I'm going to type in equals concatenate, which is basically combining two strings. I'm going to get that number, comma, and I'm going to put in an additional comma and just drag it. If this looks at all complicated, I guarantee once you just play around a little bit, you'd be able to figure it out in an hour. So now I have my categories, and click Run, and they show up. There's some extra ones here because some additional data that they have more points than I'm using. The y-axis, I'm going to go ahead and just change this to sentences. All this other stuff, I don't really care about the colors right now. I could look up in the guide and see how to change it if I wanted to. Same thing with the legend, I don't care about that. Series, obviously these don't make any sense, so what I'm just going to do is I'm going to replace them with something that does. So for example, instead of Tokyo, we'll do probation. Instead of New York, we'll do prison. And instead of Berlin, we'll do other. And I'm only going to use 3 series, so I'm just going to actually get rid of this last one. So all I need to do now is replace the data that they had with the actual true data that we want to show. So I go back to the Excel file. I already had this concatenate thing, so I could actually just drag this down. So this is the probation with the comma separating it. So I can copy this, go back to the JS fiddle, and paste it over it. I'll do the same thing for prison. And for other. I'm doing this live, so I hope it doesn't screw up, but cross your fingers. Click run. Let's see what it looks like. Something didn't work. I would probably have to spend a little bit of time to figure out what actually was not working here, but for the most part, let me show you an example where it does work. Oops, what did I do? That would be once I figured out what was wrong. It's probably just some sort of comma or an extra comma. This would be what it would look like. So what I could just do then is I could actually forward this link to our webmaster and say, hey, can you put this as an article on our website? And it would be fine. It would automatically pick up all the styles and so on that our master website uses. So, I mean, that's one way I think that SACs can actually get content on their website that isn't 100 pages long as reports, but it's quick. It might be something of interest where it doesn't require 100 pages, maybe just an interesting data note and so on. Let's see. I think I've kind of covered this. Our articles are basically the shorter versions. I like to think of them, you've probably heard the expression, people want to see the sausage and not the sausage factory. The articles would be considered the sausage. The PDFs that we have, which are long, they have all sorts of statistical models, graphs and so on, would be considered the sausage factory. Okay, data profiles, these are brand new. They're actually not yet linked on our website. The link will probably be available in about 2 weeks. I'm just having our Office of Public Information officer actually edit the text on these. Let me actually, I think I saw a question. I'll answer the questions toward the end, I think. So for the data profiles, we kind of ran into a problem. We have all this data in Excel files, but if someone wants to download a lot of data from one county, then they might have to string together dozens of different Excel files for that to work. Excuse me. And we used to, as you saw on the old websites, we used to put these county profiles out, but they were in static PDFs. They would fall out of date too quickly. So by the time a PDF actually was released to public, there might already be 2 additional years of data and so on. So we wanted something that would be more kind of real time. We got an SJS grant to actually just to show criminal history in terms of arrests from the state police database, as well as prison admissions and exits in an aggregate format. That's part of the SJS grant that we got. Before, the only thing we really had on our website was here's how many new court admissions there were, here's how many exits there were, and that's kind of it. So what I did though is I took what we were using for that SJS grant and created a data structure that would let us show other types of data as well, not just CRI data, which CRI I'm referring to as the criminal history database, and not just Department of Corrections data. I coded this all in Cold Fusion and HighCharts, which is that graphing software that I just showed you, and it's pretty much all developed using SJS grant funds. I got training in Cold Fusion, which is server-side scripting, as part of the SJS grants. And I'll go ahead and show what those profiles will look like. This will be the front page of the profiles. As I said, this is going to be mostly for a lay audience. I think expert users will actually benefit from this too, because it's a lot of information in one place. But you notice there's not many options. You basically just pick which profiles you want to look at, and you pick a county or geography or state in this case. So you can pick Illinois for the statewide, every county you can pick, or you can pick a judicial circuit. Some of our data, particularly the CRI data, we can't show numbers under 10. So as a result, I usually will just actually use the judicial circuit if they pick a county, which will produce a warning, which you'll see. Let's say I want to look at all of these for Cumberland County. Click for Choose Profile. I'm going to get that warning that says that if you're selecting a county, the CRI data will be mostly at the judicial circuit level that Cumberland County is in. So go ahead and click the button again to proceed. And it loads a very kind of long profile. It's got a table of contents to the left, which is very similar to what our articles have. And this one covers 4 different things: the CRY arrest profile for the 5th Judicial Circuit, which Cumberland County is part of; the adult court profile, which is aggregate data that we get from the Administrative Office of Illinois Courts; and then prison admission and exit data. And lastly, an appendix that kind of has some background data. So in the profile itself, I have to still code an intro page at the top, but there is basically a brief description of what the data is that we're showing, and generally we're also going to include a description of why we're showing it. So for the overall arrest incidents, I'll show that, and then I'll show, by the way, these, like the high charts, I didn't mention this before, they are somewhat interactive. You can click certain things to make parts of it appear and disappear. Pie charts, you can have the pies pop out and so on. So I show the arrest counts, I show the circuit population. So for example, here, Vermilion County has 54% of all the arrests in the CRY data, and they only have about 45% of the population. Not an incredibly interesting finding, but those type of comparisons can be made. I'll show the rates per 100,000 people. These are some of the more interesting comparisons down here. Looking at, for example, the arrest by age. As you would probably expect, the age 45 plus arrests are actually a much lower proportion than what you would expect given the population. Not surprising at all, younger people are the ones who are most likely being arrested. Arrest by sex, you can probably guess that males are disproportionately more likely to be arrested. As you can see, in that case, it appears that way. Arrest by race, this is going to vary quite a bit by county. This could be pretty useful. This is at the Judicial Circuit, not the county in this case. But for example, the arrest by race for this Judicial Circuit, the 5th Judicial Circuit, it's about 25% are non-white arrestees. The population is only 2%. So that could be pointing to some of the problem there. And then we also show the arrest by the felony class. In the appendix, we explain what the different classes are. The arrest by an offense type, we use a lot of different offense types for this one. And that's the end of the arrest profile. Court profile is actually much more simple because it came to us as aggregate data. You just basically show the filings, filings rate, felony convictions and sentences. So you can see what proportion of your county is going to DOC versus probation, probation caseloads. I think it's kind of an interesting thing where there was a huge jump. And I'm not sure, this might actually be a result of one of our programs called Adult Redeploy, where it's possible that, you know, it's the felony and the administrative ones that go up. Maybe this is because a lot of people are being put into Adult Redeploy in lieu of prison instead. I'm not actually positive that the Cumberland is part of Redeploy, so I'm still looking into it more. And then now onto the adult prison admission section. These, by the way, you can use these to navigate through the profile itself. You can get kind of seasick though doing it too much. So here I kind of describe what a prison admission is, what the different admission types are, and show a chart of that. The rate of the new court prison admissions by age, and also the population by age, prison admissions by sex, population by sex, same thing with race. It's very similar to what the arrests look like. And then the exits look pretty identical to what the admissions look like in terms of the data. Just instead of admission type, will be exit type. I think for the most part, though, the rest of it's very similar. And then the appendix at the end will just have what the population data is that we're using for the rates. It will have population by the total population, population by age, by sex, by race, ethnicity. For the offense classes, it will describe what those offense classes are as well as what the possible sentences are. And then for the categories, it will basically give a description of what kind of offenses are included in those categories that we've created. But that is the entire profile. It's very simple to use. There's very few options, so you can't really screw up anything. It actually looks pretty good when you print it out. So this is, I think, our kind of method of replacing those PDF static profiles that we used to produce years ago in the past. Okay, I've got 45 minutes. That's okay. So right now, where we are, at least in our stack, is I think thinking about our users as kind of novice users and advanced users, not really so much as their proficiency in terms of using data tools and data, but more so their knowledge of the criminal justice system. I think the data profiles are going to be really strongly suited for the novice users. It can also be used by the advanced users. Our Excel files and incident list can probably be used by anybody as long as they depending on how much knowledge they have of the actual data and what the data means. I have something called a criminal history and recidivism tool that I'm actually not going to show. The reason why I'm not going to show it, it's not a bad tool in terms of the actual information that I produce. The problem is the way that I set up the actual layout and the design of it, I want to redo. So what I plan on doing is actually removing the actual tool itself and instead putting the information into a data profile. So it'll just be another one of those checkboxes in the data profile. So anybody would be able to understand it without knowing, for example, why would I care about if it's a technical violation, recidivism event versus a new court, and so on. It'll be all explained. Let me show you. Let me actually go on to the next part. So I don't know what other SACs are using in terms of tools. I kind of get a sense that there may not be a lot of SACs that are actually using data tools. Maybe they want to try to actually kind of put their foot in the water and see what they can actually use. There's a big advantage to starting now versus when we started back in 2010 is that now there's a lot more options. There's a lot of free options. Back when we started, that didn't really exist. So I'm going to show you just two possible options for the advanced users for the mapping and so on. The first is what we actually use is the Instant Atlas Desktop, which is commercial software. It does require a license to be purchased. You can choose to pay for upgrades and annual fees versus our annual support. It's not too expensive if I remember correctly. The big advantage of Instant Atlas to me is that it's extremely easy to use. It was originally built so that people who are not web developers would actually be able to put together these kind of data atlases. And it was, I would say it's very successful at that. There's several different templates. Like we have, I think, a license. When you buy a license for each template. And we bought, I think, 4 licenses. I think we're only actually using 2 right now. We're using a single map and the scatter plot tool. There's another option, though, that's free kind of in quotes. There's some conditions to it. It's called Tableau Public. I think a lot of people have probably heard of Tableau. It's heavily used in business. The free version allows you to have up to 10 gigabytes of data in the cloud. And 10 gigabytes of data for a SAC, I think, is way more than they'll ever run into, unless you're putting case level, individual level records on the cloud, which you probably don't want to do anyway. I don't think you'll ever get near 10 gigabytes, so I wouldn't worry about that limitation. What I would worry about, though, is that I think, at least my opinion, I haven't done too much with it yet. I've just kind of put my foot in the water with Tableau myself. Is that I find it to be much more difficult to set up. There are a lot of guides and videos out there and examples other people can provide. In terms of the data, getting the data into the 2 tools, Instant Atlas allows you to use either Excel or Access. So the data can be either normalized or in a non-normalized form. Tableau, though, actually prefers a normalized form, but in some cases, some of the charts actually are easier to make with a denormalized data. If you have time, I'll get into what the difference between a normal and denormalized data set is. With Tableau, too, you don't actually purchase a license, or you don't have a license for a given template. You have all sorts of different charts available for any template. And there isn't really even such a thing as a template in Tableau. It's kind of a word I'm using. Okay, so let me show you what our Instant Atlas products look like. I'll start with Instant Atlas. So when you go to our SAC website, let's see if I can find it. There it is. Under the tools is where we house all of our different tools. Criminal history recipients tool, I'm not going to go into that one. The detailed data tables was what was originally that accessible alternative to Flash. I no longer think you actually need these if you're using the HTML5 version of Instant Atlas because HTML5 is accessible. So I can show you what these look like. They're very basic things. You pick a county, and then it's going to give you all sorts of data on that county. The only problem is that there's not a lot of context to what it's actually showing you. It describes what it is and what the rate and the count is. And it's not necessarily clear, too, like what clicking on different things will do. So if I click here, I'll get the report domestic offenses for all the different counties. If I want to know what this means, I have to probably click one of the years. Yeah, so that will give me the definition. If I click a county, it'll give me go back to that huge county profile type of page. But like I said, these were originally intended to be an alternative to the Flash template. So I don't even actually think these are necessary anymore. You might actually like them, though, if you want to show a lot of data for your counties in one spot. And I believe if you buy an instant Alice template for like the mapping, this comes free. So I mean, it's basically you buy one of the other templates, you probably get this free. But under below that, there was when you actually see our tools, single map tool and the scatterplot analysis tool. And this is the single map tool. There's something kind of weird going on with the Zoom. I think I just zoomed out of it and reload it. What it does is it allows you to put in data into various themes. So for example, I'm using UCR offenses, other offenses, arrests, juvenile arrests, and so on, corrections. We'll pick a corrections one. We'll do new court additions, Department of Corrections, 2014. And then that data will show up in the map. Excuse me. The map is kind of interactive with the chart. So if I click on click, that line is going to stay on the chart. I can put comparison lines on there, for example, to compare it to Illinois, to compare it to a southern region. I can click and use several lines. I can switch this chart to a sorted column chart. The legend itself is interactive, and you can create filters from the legend. So for example, if I only want to look at those that have a high new court admissions rate to DOC, I can click this, and I could say filter. And now I'm only looking at those. You can kind of swap the legend into different types of things. So for example, if I wanted to do a continuous thing, that would work. A continuous kind of break system. Let me get rid of the filter. You can put in your own custom filters. So for example, if I only want to look at, say, the central region, and so on. So it's a pretty flexible tool. It does a lot, and it does a lot to where it's actually very easy to create. I think if you were to download the evaluation, you can get something like this up and running pretty shortly. The only thing that might take quite a while is to actually write up all these descriptions. And it does allow you to put all these descriptions as well as links to data and so on in the actual tool itself. You could swap between the map and the table of the data. There's just a lot of things that it can do. We have another variation of this called the scatterplot one. And this one lets you look at, for some reason I had it zoomed to a small state level there. It allows you to look at two indicators at once. So for example, if I want to look at felony probation sentences on the x-axis and felony sentences on the y-axis, this would kind of give me an indication of, for example, which counties are sentencing a lot of people to prison compared to probation. So for example, White County here is quite low on the felony probation sentence rate, but they're pretty high on the felony prison sentence rate. You'll get a regression kind of equation and a correlation coefficient. I think you'll even get some other possible statistics that you could put in there. I think I limited to just those two though for us. This is also one of the things too where you can create kind of your own groupings. So I think if I click filter, yeah. So I think both these tools are very good for kind of descriptive, or not descriptive, explorative data analysis. And I think they're more intended for our advanced users who really kind of would actually know what they want to compare in the first place. The profiles would be for someone who doesn't really know. Okay, let's see. So with Instant Atlas, you have basically a couple different software components. One is a data manager, which is basically either an Excel file or an Access database. And I'll show you what the Excel file actually looks like. I think most people should start with the Excel file unless they already have all their data in Access, in which in that case I would go ahead and use the Access database. There is a designer that allows you to kind of move around things on the template. So if you want to put the chart in the bottom left corner and the map in the upper right, and so on, you can do it. There's a styles editor that lets you customize your colors, your fonts, and so on. So if you want to have your atlas look exactly like the rest of your site, you'll be able to do it. And then finally, there's a publisher that basically just takes all those three parts and ties them together into an audience itself. Let's take a look. Actually, I'll show you what the Excel file data manager looks like. You'll see it's pretty simple. Try to make this a little bit bigger. So you start off with a geography and filter sheet, and basically this just has a code for the actual county. We're using counties in Illinois. I think most states will probably do the same. We use a county code, the county name. You can put a link to certain things about the county. Like you could probably put a link to the county's official website. If you want to put in filters, for example, we have a filter for judicial circuit, a filter for urban rural, filter for the region. You can put them there. I don't think there's any limit to the number of filters you can have. The actual data will go into one of these worksheets that's kind of prefaced with IA data sheet. So in the actual data sheet, what you will have is the code, the county name, and then for each indicator, you start off with a big kind of merge cell that has the actual theme. So in this case, the theme is property UCR index offenses. Then below that, you have a indicator within that theme. This one would be the burglary offense rate. And then I don't think anything has to go here, but here's where you'd have the actual rate. For example, the rate for 2000 and the count for 2000, rate for 2001, count for 2001, rate for 2002, count for 2002, and so on. And you just basically repeat your data like that. So I think pretty much any SAC would be able to get their data to look like that if they use spreadsheets already or if they're using an Access database. The other sheet that you want to look into is the metadata. And this sheet that I'm using, I use the Access Data Manager, so this workbook is actually pretty old. But I don't think you actually have to do as much as I was doing here. But here's where you would put down, for example, descriptions of what the data are. Maybe you would want to put in some caveats of the data, links to the data source, link to a download of the data, and so on. This takes a little while to work out, but once you do one or two, it's actually pretty simple. So once you have that data all entered, you just there's an add into the Excel file. You just click IA export, and it's going to ask you what type you want to export it to. The HTML5 versions use JSON, which is a JavaScript object notation. So you click OK and tell it where to save it. I'm not going to go ahead and run this one because I just did it prior to the webinar starting, but it will produce these files, which you can then put onto the web server. So when you actually update data, you don't have to replace the entire atlas. You just replace the data files. I actually just replaced the data files on ours this morning. So let's see. I think I've covered this. This is what the Access Data Manager just looks like. It's an Access database. If you know how to use an Access database, you'll have no trouble actually figuring this out. I actually thought it was somewhat actually easier than the Excel file, but that's probably just because I use Access a lot. This would be what the actual designer looks like, and it's one of the things where it's a drag and drop thing. You insert what you want to insert in terms of charts, maps, tables, and so on, and you just move them around with the mouse. And same thing, you put in your buttons that you want, and so on. There isn't really even a need for like a For Dummies manual. Tableau has a For Dummies book, and it's actually pretty helpful. I've actually looked at it. But in this case, Instant Alice provides a kind of tutorial. I used the tutorial, and I think the first time I got one up and running, it took maybe a couple hours at most. There's some knowledge that could be helpful in terms of coding, but I would not say it's required. It's for kind of doing these things like toggle buttons that switch between two different charts and so on. But one thing that you could do is that if you see something that another organization has in terms of what they're using in Instant Alice, and Instant Alice is used quite a bit all over the world. I think maybe actually the United States has one of the lesser kind of presences, but it's pretty popular in Europe, I think. You could actually download their config XML file, which is this entire thing is just based off of this one config XML file. I could just quickly show you what I mean by that. If I were to change the link here, instead of saying atlas.html, if I make this config.xml, it's going to show this XML document, which probably looks like gobbledygook. But you could save this, and you could import it to your version of Instant Alice, and it will show up in the designer, and it will look exactly like ours looks. So if you see an idea and you want to figure out how did they do that, this will work. I think I've actually stolen, or I mean borrowed, several ideas from other agencies across the world. In terms of the data manager, like you can see what this looks like compared to the actual manager versus, not the designer manager anyway. What you see here is pretty much what you get in the actual live version. So you have a big rectangle here that's got the map in the table, 2 wide rectangles here, and 2 other rectangles below, which is basically exactly as it looks on our website. Big rectangle, 2 wide rectangles, 2 rectangles. I think I've covered this. Okay, I'll go ahead and show you Tableau Public. With just a warning, I barely got into Tableau Public. I probably spent about 12 hours with it total, just trying to see if it's, like Illinois is in a kind of a budget crisis right now, and I don't even know if we'll be able to pay to get our annual upgrade and support from Instalis. So just in case, I want to look into having a backup, just in case, you know, a couple of years down the line, maybe we'll have to go and switch over to something else. I don't think that will happen, but just in case, I decided to look into Tableau Public. Tableau Public allows numerous types of charts. The charts that are allowed are just dependent entirely on which data you're using. And what you do is you create these worksheets. The worksheets will have a given like one single chart on it. You can combine those in a dashboard and also stories. It's kind of like anything else where it's a drag and drop interface, but I think the actual interface is considerably more complicated to where you're going to need to watch a tutorial, you're going to need to look at a book. It's much more work, in my opinion, than Instant Atlas. There is something about the public definition. If you're interested in Tableau Public, I would definitely look and see what that's going to entail. I think if you put a dashboard up, it's public, which means other people can download it. And for example, they can't edit your dashboard and upload it and say that they're you, but they can download it, change it a little bit, and upload it on their own website. So it's almost like they can steal your dashboard in a way. But if you are interested in, you should definitely look at what public entails in this case. I'll show you then what Tableau Public actually looks like in terms of the designer as well as what it looks like on the website. I'm not going to go into too much with Tableau Public though, because it's fairly complex and I won't be able to cover too much. This is the actual designer. These are like the different worksheets. What I tried to do is to try to create something similar to Instant Atlas to see if I could actually get one to work. I sort of have one working. For example, this is a column chart. I could switch this to a different chart if I wanted to. This is a heat map. It all depends on which particular types of data you're looking at. That's probably not going to make much sense there. It does allow doing mapping. For example, this is the map of some indicator, which I'm not actually sure right now what it is. But I'll show you. What you do is you put all these pieces together into a dashboard. And the dashboard could look something like this. I had this working yesterday where for some reason now these categories are kind of like disappearing. I'll show you actually what it looks like on the live side. Okay, so I have a Tableau Public profile. I think it's public. I'm not positive, but I could share this with anybody who is interested. I don't consider this to be like officially it's part of our state website or anything like that. It's just something I'm working on my own. This is kind of like something I did that's similar to what Instant Atlas would look like. I don't think it's nearly as polished, to say the least. But I mean, you could switch, for example, felony sentence to DOC, felony sentence to other. It does seem to work where you can tie things together. You'll notice like the years are not actually showing up here, but they're visible once you hover over them. That's just something I have to work out. You could switch the categories. Maybe no. Yeah, this definitely takes much more work than Instant Atlas. Let me show you actually an example of the story though, that you can do. So Tableau is also used for like kind of like infographics. So let's, for example, say I'm interested in reported cases of child abuse and neglect compared to indicated cases of child abuse and neglect for one given county over time. I don't know the county name of this particular one. I'm just using the FIPS code. But here you can see there's a pretty similar pattern where the overall counties typically have a same kind of distribution of how the reported cases and the indicated cases correlate. So I would be kind of surprised if all of a sudden a county moved around much from this line. So let's see what that looks like. In story mode, you can actually proceed to different dashboards. So let's go to 2006. It's still in the line, not much difference there. 2007, starting to move up a little bit. So let's see if it goes any further. Let's fast forward to 2010. Now it's much further up. You can annotate things in story mode, so I could add a label there. And let's see if this actually keeps if this returns back down to the line by 2014. And no, it doesn't. It stays higher for some reason. Also with story mode, you don't have to stick to just one chart or one chart type. You can put in other types. For example, if you wanted to show that county in a column chart, you could do it. So I think basically Tableau Public seems to me a little more flexible than Instant Analyst, but I mean with that flexibility is the more complicated design process. I would recommend that you might as well give both a try as long as you have the time. Both have a free evaluation version. Tableau Public is free as it is, but Instant Analyst has a free evaluation that works pretty much exactly like the normal version. I think it just comes with like a watermark. So if you were to put it on your website, you would have some sort of giant demo or something written across it. There are other options too besides Tableau Public and Instant Analyst. I think now there's actually going to be a lot more options than there were just a couple of years ago, but this is just showing you two such examples. One of the recommendations that I would recommend, particularly for promoting work, is to try to use social media. I'm not really an expert at it, to tell you the truth, but Facebook and Twitter, and actually I think Twitter was probably a very good platform for something like this. We've had, for example, the governor retweet some of our tweets about what we published and some analyses and so on. I have heard people recommend trying to use videos, and I'm somewhat lukewarm on that idea, only for two reasons. One, I don't know if people are actually going to want to sit through a video. I don't know if I should be saying that as I'm doing a webinar, but the other thing is, if it's a video explaining how to use a tool, that probably means the tool itself is too complicated. In that case, you should consider simplifying it to where you probably don't need to actually explain it with the tool. On the other hand, though, if you want to show a video that says, look at these interesting findings I have produced by using this tool, that makes more sense because it's not really a how-to, it's what can you do. And then the last recommendation I would use for other SACs is if you don't have staff who know how to use databases, and Microsoft Access, MySQL, and so on, I would definitely recommend taking the time to train them in that. You learn to work with data in a much more flexible structure, so you can work with data in all sorts of different applications, and it doesn't really make a difference. If you can get it to a normalized form, you can get it into pretty much any form that you want afterwards. It allows you to enforce data integrity and consistency. I think the updates to data are much easier and much safer. So, for example, when you update rates, you don't actually store a rate; you store the calculation of the rate. The rates are always computed on the fly. And when I learned it, I didn't know databases when I started here. I learned them pretty much actually as well with an SJS grant. And I would say I had a massive productivity increase once I learned how to use databases. And stuff that would take me a day and a half to 2 days to do in Excel or SPSS, I could do in 5 minutes in SQL now. And that's not an exaggeration. I would say my productivity probably increased 20 to 30 times just by learning how to use databases. And I think that's kind of it for the presentation. I guess I can take questions now. So I don't know if I should give the mic back to Stan or what's here. I do see one question already, though.
Yeah, you can address that question if you'd like, Mark. The question I believe is when you were talking about the 80% and 20% of the users on your website, of whether you have different user profiles or whether you're just making sure that you're aware of both target audiences as you develop your information.
I would say it's definitely more the latter, that we're now kind of aware. It's actually kind of difficult to figure out who your users actually are. But probably what I learned in the criminal history recidivism tool is I had a professor who showed that to, Professor Loyola University, Dave Olson, who showed that to various probation departments. And he was telling me that he thinks that the tool has a lot of good information, but they kind of need something to where you can guide them on what the information is, how to put it in order, and what it actually means. And that tool just did not do that at the time. So it's kind of like basically I've learned that we were not making things simple enough for our audience. But we don't really have a user profile or anything like that. It's kind of just as over time, that's what we've learned just by interacting with people who use our site.
Okay, so if other folks have questions, please send them to me or to me and Mark via the chat feature. I wanted to ask you, what have you seen in terms of the usage of the website in regard to these changes that you've made? What kind of feedback have you gotten? Have you seen changes in how people use things, what they use, and so forth and so on?
It's kind of hard to say because it's difficult to figure out who your users are. We have things like Google Analytics. We can tell what people are downloading and so on. I think in general that we have noticed a little bit more engagement with the articles. I haven't really checked to see the actual analytics. I still have to add, basically you have to add in the analytics code to which you're going to provide to use the analytics. I haven't actually checked to see what they look like yet. We actually just recently, that switch to the mobile version is pretty recent. So we'll probably have to wait a couple months to see what the difference is in terms of before and after. I suspect though that our reports, the views on our reports, I would expect to not change much. Because I think it's what's going to happen is it's not that people will read the article in place of the report. I think they were just skipping the report entirely, but now they have an alternative.
And has there been any, I mean, have you had any other feedback from, you know, grantees, from other state agencies, anything like that?
You know, over time, we've learned that the county profiles were missed, those PDFs in the past. And the reason why we haven't been doing that in recent years is those things take forever to produce. We have 102 counties, so you have to produce 102 PDFs. But now with the data profile tool, we should be able to get that to a more rapid, almost kind of real-time issue or a real-time product. So I think that will satisfy some of the grantees who will often just be like 1 or 2 numbers. Yeah, other things that's like we work with other agencies, and just based on their feedback on the tools, I've come to realize that simplicity is often better than some of the more advanced tools that we have, and I think that should actually be the priority first.
And what about future plans? What's planned for the future?
Probably the big thing for me, at least, is to put more stuff into that county profile interface. Right now there's only, I think, 4 or 5 things in there, but I want to put in the UCR data. I want to transfer the criminal history and recidivism information to make that to its own profile. I don't know if we'll have any additional tools beyond what we have now. There probably gets to a point, too, where you kind of have tool overload if you have too many things. So if you have like 19 tools on your website, you have to have something that will guide the user to figure out which ones they actually need to use. So I'd keep it down to just a couple. I think I'd probably keep it down to around 4 to 5 maximum. Yeah, I don't know if we're going to be applying for another SGS grant that's related to the whatever, I forgot what the actual name of the track is. It's like the website improvement one. I think we're going to be skipping that one this year and going for the other version. But yeah, that's pretty much it, I think.
So could you give some sort of an estimate of the time and resources that this took? I mean, I know you touched on this a little bit, but in terms of development and then in terms of maintenance?
Yeah. To download, I'll kind of go into the what most other SACs I think would want to use would be probably like that instant type of product. That's pretty quick. As long as you have your data in-house in like pretty good shape, to get an actual application up and running on a website, I would say it takes maybe a month. And that would be probably a week or maybe a week learning how to actually use the software, a week getting your data into it, maybe another week writing up the actual metadata, like the description of the data itself, and then the last week would be testing. And then after that, I mean, it's basically just tweaking things like changing the appearance and so on. Its analysis is just very simple, so I would recommend it for most SACs who don't have a lot of coding experience. The other thing with instant analysis, when you update the data, I use the Access Database Manager, and one problem that I have is for some reason it takes me about 12 hours for Access to produce the updated data files. So if you screw up one thing in the update, you have to restart that 12-hour process. And it might just be something on my end where I'm not doing something correctly. But in terms of actually updating the data, like it probably takes about I don't know, maybe of actual like real work that a person is doing and not just the machine is doing in the background, I would say you can probably get by on 4 hours every 3 months. It's not a lot of time required because you don't have to replace anything but the data files itself. With Tableau Public, though, actually the updated data looks like it would actually be much easier, just because it allows this. It's actually recommended to use this normalized data format that's really easy to produce. At least on my end, it is.
Okay, and we have a question from one of our participants. Is the text in the profile replacement tool customized to each county or judicial district, or is it standard language that appears no matter what is chosen by the user?
It's going to be customized to the geography type. So, for example, if you're picking a county, the text will say your county and so on. If you pick a judicial circuit, it will say judicial circuit X, judicial circuit Y, whatever. If you're picking Illinois as a state, it's going to say the state had an average rate of, and so on. So the text is pretty much customized. Not fully, there's some things I have to check and see if I'm getting that correct. But yeah, I don't think I have too many places where, for example, it will say in the text itself, Adams County versus Bond County and so on. There are some things though too where certain things will appear only if you pick a judicial circuit or the state. So for example, if you wanted to know about the arrests within the judicial circuit, you wouldn't see that if you were to pick the statewide value, because it's basically, I produced a chart that shows for the judicial circuit which counties are in the actual circuit and what their arrests were. I don't produce the same thing for the state because it would be 102 lines. But I mean, it is customizable to where I could show different things based off of what's chosen.
And could you tell us a little bit about how you went about selecting the tools that you did select initially, and why did you pick those particular things?
Yeah, the main one was Instant Atlas. For the most part, this was back in 2010, 2011, I think when we picked it. There was not a lot out there at the time. I would say we actually pretty much narrowed it down to 2 choices. You go with Instant Atlas, which kind of has this very easy to use interface, or we try to create our own, basically, ArcGIS server application. And just looking at all the requirements of the ArcGIS server application, we probably need to get a consultant. We don't know how easy it would be to maintain it and so on. It was a pretty clear choice. This is just because back then there were not a lot of options for showing this type of work. I'm not even sure if Tableau was even around back then. Tableau, I think now is like the leader in the dashboard industry, but back then it was kind of a choice amongst a very small number of options. Now I probably would try Tableau Public first to see if I can get working what I want to get working because it's free. As long as what's in the public license is okay with your agency. And if I couldn't get it to work, I'd probably go with something like Instant Atlas. And one thing too though is if you are in a SAC and maybe you have turnover, you're going to want to get some sort of product where if you get a new staff person in who doesn't know a lot of coding or anything like that, they'll be able to update that data without having to take a course to figure out how to just apply and update. So that's where I think Instant Atlas would work pretty well too. Yeah, but in terms of finding the actual software now, I would just do like a Google search for it, and I'm sure you'll find comparisons of all the different products out there now. What we have, we're pretty happy with. It's got basically the functionality. I don't even use actually all the functionality that Instant Atlas allows, but at this point in time, I don't think we're going to switch because for one, we'd have to buy all new software, but also we're happy with what it provides so far. So.
Okay, I am not seeing any other questions from our attendees. I will remind the folks on the line that we will have a copy of Mark's presentation posted on our website. You need to give us a few days to get that done. and so you'll be able to find the slides on there. I'm just going to give it a second here. If anybody has any last questions, go ahead and send them in now. All right, so I'm not seeing any more questions. We've launched our poll. If you could, those of you on the line, if you could take a few minutes and participate and answer the questions, that will help us in planning for future webinars. I want to thank Mark very much for that informative and comprehensive presentation. I hope you all got a lot of information out of it. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. We hope that you enjoyed the presentation. We have a webinar scheduled for a week from today, so I hope you'll join us for that. Check our website, jrsa.org, for more information about that and for more information about future webinars. Thanks again for joining us. Don't forget to fill out the poll. We'll leave that up for a few minutes, and have a great afternoon.